Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids, The Naughty Gnomes of No, by Jamie Ricks. Today's story is Message in a Bottle. Some people make their living by doing the oddest things. Who, for example, locks the doors in a lock factory? Who ties the luggage label on a dead man's toe? Who decides what colour dress the Queen should wear when she's handling chameleons? And who collects badger farts and releases them in lifts? Somebody does. But I know a man with a far stranger job than any of these. His name is Ernest Partridge. He has a wife called Louise and a son called Poppering. The Partridges were not a rich family. They lived in a rundown cottage in Kent, where once they had owned a thriving orchard. Now behind the house there stood a solitary tree of the species Williams bon Chrétien. It was such an old tree that over the years its branches had produced less and less fruit until one year they produced just one piece. From then on, a single pear was all that could be coaxed from the tree. And you don't have to be a fruit farmer to realise that one pear a year is hardly enough to sustain a family of three, unless you are clever. And Ernest was very clever. Instead of selling his pear at the market for pennies, he turned it into a money-spinning mystery. When the fruit bud first appeared in March, he tied a narrow-necked bottle over the bud and grew the pear inside. In September, when the pear was ripe and was a full 3 times wider than the neck of the bottle, it was now inside. He cut it off the branch, filled the bottle with clear preserving alcohol, put a cork in the neck, and sealed the pear inside the bottle with a generous drippings of wax. Only then did he take it to market. 6 days a week, whatever the weather. 6 days a week, whatever the weather, he pitched his stall next to the greengrocer's and the butcher's and invited passers-by to guess how he had got the large pear inside this tiny bottle. If anyone guessed, they were allowed to keep the pear. If not, they paid £1 for the failing. In this way, Ernest Partridge put food on the table and shoes on Poppering's feet. And every year, when he corked up his new pear, he put last year's bottle on a high shelf in the kitchen, next to all the other bottled pears that had baffled the public for many years. So, for you see, nobody had ever guessed the secret. In 15 years, Ernest Partridge's bottled pear had mystified the world. And that was just how Ernest and Louise liked it. But not Poppering. Poppering did not like the pear one bit. When he was at school, the other boys teased him about it. "My dad's a milkman," said the ringleader, Gilbert Hyde. "Ralph's dad's a dustman, Andy's dad's a farmer, and Pete's dad's a lorry driver. Now these are all proper jobs." At the end of every day, a man can be proud of what he's achieved. "But your dad, Poppering, that's a different story. Remind us what he does again?" "He's a pear in a bottle man," shouted Ralph the Joker Jackman. You know what he does," blushed Poppering. The boys roared with laughter as Gilbert picked up a woodlouse off the ground and dropped it into his bottle of lemonade. "Oh, look, everyone," he mocked. "I've got a woodlouse in a bottle, At last I can go into the big wide world and make my fortune. That night, Poppering informed his parents that he never wanted to go to school again. "And it's all your fault," he told his father. "Why don't you change your job? Do something normal like other parents." "There's nothing wrong with being different," said Ernest Partridge. "You should be proud of where you come from." "Which is why," added his mother, "now that you've turned 10, Poppering, we think you're old enough to see what your father does for a living. So that when those asses at school call me names," said his father, "and tell you I don't do a proper job, you can put them straight. Would you like that?" The question was unexpected, that Poppering could not think of a single reason to say no. At 6 o'clock the next morning, with the moon still bright in the sky, Mrs. Partridge wound a scarf around Poppering's neck and kissed him on the cheek. "Come on then," said his father, tucking the bottled pear inside his jacket. "Let's be at 'em." At first, Poppering enjoyed the hustle and bustle of the market, but as the rain set in, the novelty wore off. By 8 o'clock he was soaked to his kidneys. "Nothing like a bit of weather to keep a man on his toes," laughed his dad. "Come on, Poppering, let's hear what you've got in those lungs." Roll up," shouted Poppering. "Solve the conundrum of the pear in the bottle." Even as he shouted it, Poppering could feel his voice shrinking next to sausages, £2 a pound. £2 a pound. "And I've got tip-top tellies on from Taiwan." His cry sounded rather silly by 10 o'clock. His body was covered in thin film of ice. By 12, the cold squeezed his bones till they ached. "Everything all right, son?" beamed his father. Poppering could not have borne the cold had he not at that moment caught sight of an unwelcome face in the crowd. It was Gilbert Hyde. When he saw Poppering holding the pear in the bottle, he pointed him out to his father, and they both laughed. Then Gilbert made the sign of the loser on his forehead and drew his index finger off his other hand across his throat. His meaning was clear. When Poppering went back to school on Monday, Gilbert Hyde was going to make his life a living hell. For the rest of the day, as sleet turned to hail, turned to snow, Poppering shivered behind the stool and brooded in silence, cursing his dad for the job he had chosen. When he got home, his mother was waiting for him. "So?" she trilled. "How was it?" Poppering could see the next question before she'd even asked it. It was the one he had been dreading all day. "Did you enjoy yourself?" It would have been kind to say yes, not the end of the world, to say that's all right. But to come back with no was cruel. Something had snapped in Poppering's head. From being a normal boy who did as he was told and went where his parents went, he turned into a grumpy gnome of no, who refused to be seen in public with his parents, who embarrassed him. "But why?" asked his father. "Because people laugh at me when I'm with you. If you had a proper job, it would be different. But that pear in a bottle is ridiculous." His mother thought he was joking. "You're the one being ridiculous," she laughed. "We're your parents, Poppering, and until you're old enough to look after yourself, you'll go where we tell you." "I won't," he said. From now on, I'm only going out with you if I want to." The following morning was Sunday. Mr. Partridge went off to the market as usual, and Mrs. Partridge stood in the hall and cried, "Come on, Poppering, we're going to the shops." The boy appeared at the top of the stairs and said, "I told you last night I'm not coming." Then he rushed back to bed. His mother dropped her shopping basket and stormed up after him. "Get downstairs now!" she shouted, bursting into his room, only to find that the window was open and the curtain was billowing. She peered down at the 15-foot drop into the garden and pulled the window closed. "I know you're in here," she said quietly. "Come out, Poppering." But he didn't appear. She looked under the bed and in the cupboard. She went outside onto the landing and checked in the airing cupboard. She searched in the bathroom and in every room downstairs, but Poppering was not to be found. She couldn't go out without him, so she took off her coat, hung her basket on the hook in the cupboard under the stairs, and sat herself down on the kitchen chair. This was how Mr. Partridge found her when he returned from the market. "What's the matter?" he asked, kneeling down beside her tear-streaked face. "I can't find him," she whispered as the door from the hall crashed open and Poppering wandered in as if nothing had happened. "What are you two staring at?" he said. "And why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "Where have you been?" snapped his father angrily. "Your mother's been worried sick." "In my bedroom," he said. "But I looked there," she protested. "Then maybe you didn't see me," he said casually. "I saw you shutting the window. What's for supper?" Supper was cold shepherd's pie. Poppering's parents were not pleased with him and made it clear that they would not tolerate a repeat of today's antics. However, the very next day, which was a school day, Mrs. Partridge couldn't find Poppering anywhere. The bus will leave without you," she yelled, but the only reply came from her distant echo. The house was as silent as a morgue. This time, she turned out all the drawers in Poppering's bedroom, pulled back the duvet, but she couldn't find him as she rushed downstairs shouting, "Poppering, where are you?" in a high-pitched voice that sounded as if the neck of her jumper was too tight. He laughed to himself and wriggled his bottom into a tiny space behind the boiler. He liked playing hide-and-seek because he knew loads of secret places where the seekers would never find him. That night, his father read the riot act. "I know you were hiding," he bellowed, "and if it doesn't stop, I'll give you a hiding." "I wasn't hiding. I was in my room all the time," smirked the boy. "Maybe Mummy needs glasses." "You were hiding in the airing cupboard," insisted his father. "I found his biscuit wrapper on the floor. Don't you realise how dangerous it is to hide in small places?" added his mother. "You could get stuck and die." "I could also die of embarrassment at school when other children ask me what my parents do for a living. So I shouldn't have to be made to do those things either." Poppering certainly knew how to bear a grudge. "Right, that's it," his father said darkly. "Tomorrow there'll be no messing around, and you will go to school." And to make sure, he locked Poppering into his bedroom and put the key in his pocket. 3 hours later, as the grandfather clock struck 12, the boy's eyes suddenly popped open. There was a tiny, faraway voice in his head, speaking in a French accent. "Monsieur Poppering," it said, I am knowing how to change your papa's job. It is so simple. Poppering pinched himself to check he wasn't dreaming. Who is this? He whispered. Where are you? You cannot know my name, monsieur, but I know yours. You cannot see me, but I can see you. The boy pulled the duvet up to his eyes. We are good for each other. I give you what you want, and I'll give you what... and you'll give me what I want. And what do you want? Said Poppering. Laugh, said the voice. And you, Monsieur Poppering, I already know what you want. There was a silence. Poppering could not be sure if this voice wasn't his own thoughts coming alive in his head. Then the voice spoke again, only this time it was louder, and Poppering could feel warm, invisible breath popping in his ear. Kill the tree, it said. Do not chop through the roots, and soon the tree of the pear will die. It seemed like such a simple plan. Poppering didn't know why he hadn't thought of it before. He climbed out of the bedroom window, which his father had forgotten to lock, and shinned down the ivy, which grew on the garden side wall of the house. Then he took a spade from the garden shed, and as quietly as he could, punched the straight edge into the earth, and cut through the main root of the pear tree. But it was an old tree which had many roots, and what he thought would be a quick job quickly turned out to be as long as one. As dawn broke, he was still chopping, and it was another hour before he was finished. By then his mother was up. Poppering, it's time for school. Where are you? Her voice was coming down the stairs. Poppering! That was his father, and he sounded angry. We know you climbed out your window. The boy looked around for a hiding place. His parents would be running out of the back door at any moment. He threw the spade up into the branches of the pear tree, kicked the soil and leaves over the hole where he dug up the roots, and shinned up the tree. Just in time, as he settled on a branch, his parents stormed out of the door. If I catch you, roared his father, you'll wish you'd never been born. Then he headed off towards the garden shed, without so much as a glance above his head. 2 hours later, Poppering was still up the tree, when he heard the same whispering voice in his head. Monsieur Poppering, it said, I can see you. The boy looked over his left shoulder, but nobody was there. Help me! You have brought me to life! And now I'm running out of air. All Poppering could see was his father's bottle, tied firmly over the pear bud. He slid along the branch and peered through the glass, expecting to see a small pear. So imagine his surprise when, sprouting from the bud, he saw a tiny human being no taller than a grasshopper. He was shaped like a pear, with narrow shoulders and a broad beam, which was attached to the branch by a stalk. His head was covered in a milk bottle top, which he raised in a greeting to reveal a bald scalp shining like a billiard ball. Merci, monsieur, said the miniature man, when Poppering lifted the bottle off his head. You have made a minikin very happy. What's a minikin? Asked Poppering. I am, said the little Frenchman. When you cut down the roots of the tree of the pear, a minikin always grows. Did you not know this? No, said the boy. It is true. And you have helped me, and I have helped you. If the tree is dead, Monsieur Poppering, your papa can no longer put a pear in the bottle, and he will have to change his job. Don't drop the bottle, will you? Poppering had been half-heartedly looking for somewhere to lay the bottle. Put it in your pocket. We will need it later. Do you have a name? He asked. Oh, how rude of me, said the budman. I am Poor William, your friend, Monsieur Poppering. This tree has given up its life so that you can be happy. But first, I must be plucked, and it is you who must do it. The plucking. Take a tight grip around my waist and pull. Tentatively, Poppering pinched poor William around the waist and gave a sharp tug. There was a snap and a cry as the minikin popped off the branch. Are you like a fairy godmother? Asked Poppering, while the little man rubbed his bottom where the stalk had been attached. I am more of a tree sprite, but I am very magic. Now, tell me why I'm here. You've just told me, said the boy, to grant my wish. As they say in France, bingo, a new job for Papa. Well, now that the pear tree is dead, he'll have to find something different. Well, now that the pear tree is dead, you have to do something different. Bingo again. And can you think what that might be? Poppering scratched his teeth and thought long and hard when his face blossomed into a smile. Yes, he said. Yes, of course. That's why you're here. The minikin yelped and danced a jig on the branch. Now you have it, he laughed. What could be cooler than keeping something in a bottle that people would pay a fortune to see? Yes, shouted poor William. Yes, go on. Poppering was quivering with excitement. Something, squeaked the boy. Something like you. The little man stopped cheering. Like me? He said crossly. You want me to live in the bottle like a prisoner? For the rest of my life? You want your family to make a living out of my misery? Poppering looked surprised. But I thought, he stammered, I thought that's what you were saying. No, something else will be going in the bottle to make your parents' fortune, but it is not me. A sense of forbidding clouded Poppering's face. What is it then? He asked falteringly. It is you, beamed the minikin. You want your father to do something different? Bingo! Your wish is granted. Then, in the flutter of a fly's wing, he covered Poppering in porpoise grease, sat him on the neck of the bottle, and showing remarkable strength for a person barely 2 inches high, shoved him straight in. There were a few nasty cracks and crunches as the boy's bones dislocated, and one of his knees went up his bottom, but in less time than it takes to fill a thimble full of liquid gold, Poppering was inside the bottle, crushed up like a camel in a microwave. Help! He cried, with his face squashed flat against the inside of the glass. Get me out of here! The minikin, however, was not listening. He was writing a note to Poppering's parents, which he stuck to the glass with a cuckoo spit. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Partridge, the tree of the pear is dead. Leave the boy in the bottle. When Mr. and Mrs. Partridge finally found their son, their first reaction was to scream and run around in circles. But then they thought of the advantages and calmed down. For a start, the bottle's glass was clear, so Poppering could no longer hide from them, and they would know where he was at all times. Secondly, his upkeep was dramatically cheaper. The only thing he ate was worms, because worms were the only food thin enough to fit through the tiny gap between his feet and his head. But most importantly, with the death of the pear tree selling the end of their income, having a 10-year-old boy living inside a bottle was something of a godsend. And so, it was less than 3 weeks after the Minikin had budded into existence that they took Poppering out of school, where he was failing behind anyway because he could no longer hold a pen, and set off on a round-the-world tour to make their fortune. And no matter how embarrassing this was for their son, they just didn't care. So, that only goes to prove that what your parents do is none of your business! And yes, do not, and here's a lesson as well. If you come across a dead fruit tree and you hear a tiny sprouting man with a French accent up top, don't pick him, or else he might do something that you might regret.